"Step out of the vehicle, ma'am." The command cut through the cold night air like a blade, sharp and practiced, the kind that didn't expect hesitation, only obedience. Red and blue lights washed over the quiet suburban street, flickering against parked cars and trimmed lawns, turning everything into something tense, something unreal. Danielle Carter sat still behind the wheel, both hands resting calmly at 10 and 2, her breathing slow, measured, almost detached, as if she had stepped into a moment she had already lived before. The engine idled softly, a low hum beneath the pulse of sirens, and outside her window, Officer Ryan Blake approached with the rigid posture of a man certain of his authority, his flashlight beams slicing through the darkness and landing squarely on her face. "License and registration," he said, voice flat, already impatient. Danielle reached slowly, deliberately, her movements precise, never rushed, never defensive, the soft rustle of paper the only sound inside the car as she handed over her documents. Ryan glanced at them for less than a second before lowering them, his eyes narrowing, not at the information, but at her. Something in his expression shifted, subtle but unmistakable, a decision forming before any evidence could speak. Behind him, another patrol car pulled up, tires crunching lightly against the asphalt, and a second officer stepped out, watching, waiting, already aligned with whatever conclusion had been silently drawn. Danielle could feel the weight of their gaze, not just on her, but through her, as if they were searching for something that justified what they had already chosen to believe. "Step out of the vehicle," Ryan repeated, louder now, the authority in his voice expanding to fill the space between them. Danielle paused for just a fraction of a second, not in resistance, but in acknowledgement, then reached for the door handle. The cool metal clicked softly as she opened it, the night air brushing against her skin, crisp and dry, carrying the faint scent of distant pine and engine exhaust. She stepped out slowly, standing upright beside the car, her posture steady, her expression composed, her eyes meeting his without challenge, but without submission. Ryan moved closer, the faint creak of his duty belt audible in the silence, and gestured for her to turn around. "We're going to run a quick check," he said, though his tone suggested something already decided. Danielle complied. Without a word, placing her hands gently on the roof of the car, the metal cool beneath her palms, the flashing lights reflecting off its surface like broken pieces of color. Time stretched, seconds feeling heavier than they should, the quiet punctuated only by the distant hum of passing traffic and the static crackle of a police radio. The second officer circled the vehicle, shining his light inside, scanning, searching, but finding nothing. Still, no one said a word. Danielle stood there, unmoving, her breathing even, her presence calm in a moment designed to unsettle. And yet, beneath the stillness, something else lingered, something unspoken, like a shift waiting to happen, like a truth just one breath away from being heard. The metal of the car roof held the night cold like it remembered every hand that had ever been placed on it, and Danielle Carter felt it through her palms, steady and grounding, as if it were anchoring her to something deeper than the moment unfolding around her. The flashing lights continued their rhythm, red then blue, painting the quiet street in pulses that felt almost like a heartbeat, slow but relentless. Officer Ryan Blake stood just behind her, close enough that she could hear the faint shift of his boots against the pavement, the soft creak of leather as he adjusted his stance, the kind of small sounds that filled the silence when no one wanted to be the first to question what was happening. "You in a hurry tonight?" he asked, though the question did not sound like curiosity. It sounded like confirmation. Danielle did not answer right away. Her eyes stayed forward, focused on the dark stretch of road ahead, where the glow of a distant streetlight blurred softly into the night air. "No, officer," she said finally, her voice calm, even, carrying no edge, no fear, no attempt to persuade. Just a statement. Behind them, the second officer leaned into the open driver's side door, his flashlight beam moving slowly across the interior, pausing on the dashboard, the passenger seat, the back seat, as if something might reveal itself if he looked long enough. The radio on his shoulder crackled faintly, a burst of static followed by a distant voice calling out another unit several blocks away. Something routine, something unrelated, yet it filled the space with a reminder that the world was still moving beyond this moment. Ryan took a step to the side, glancing at the license in his hand again, this time holding it a little longer, his brow tightening just slightly as he read the name. Danielle Carter. The name meant nothing to him. Or at least, not yet. You live around here? He asked, his tone shifting, not softer, but more probing, like he was trying to place her into a category that made sense to him. Danielle let out a slow breath, barely visible in the cool air. I just transferred, she said. The word hung there for a second, subtle, easy to overlook, but it carried weight if someone chose to hear it. Ryan did not respond. Instead, he looked past her, scanning the quiet houses, the trimmed hedges, the dark windows that reflected the flashing lights like silent witnesses. Nothing about the scene gave him a reason to stop. And yet, he had not stopped. The second officer straightened up from the car, shaking his head slightly, signaling that there was nothing inside worth noting, nothing that justified what they were doing. Still, neither of them moved to end it. Danielle shifted her fingers slightly against the metal, not in discomfort, but in awareness, feeling the texture beneath her skin, the cool surface grounding her as the seconds stretched longer than they should have. She had been here before, not this exact street, not these exact officers, but this moment, this quiet assumption, this invisible line drawn before a single word was spoken. It was familiar in a way that did not need explanation. Ryan stepped closer again, his voice lower now, almost conversational, but carrying something underneath it that was harder, more fixed. Mind telling me where you are coming from? He asked. Danielle tilted her head just slightly, enough to acknowledge the question, but not enough to break her posture. From work, she said. What kind of work? The question came quickly this time, almost too quickly, like he needed the answer to match what he already believed. Danielle paused, not because she did not have an answer, but because she understood the moment for what it was, a narrow space where words could either escalate or simply exist. The lights continued to flash. The radio hissed again. Somewhere down the block, a porch light flicked on, someone watching from behind a curtain, unseen but present. Danielle closed her eyes for the briefest second, then opened them again, her voice steady, unshaken. Public service, she said. The words were simple, but they carried something heavier now, something that had not been there before, something that did not demand attention, but quietly waited for it. And for the first time, Ryan did not immediately respond. Ryan Blake's gaze lingered on her a second longer than before, as if the words she had just spoken did not fit neatly into the picture he had already built in his mind, and that small disruption unsettled him more than he wanted to admit. Public service. The phrase echoed quietly between them, not loud enough to challenge him, but steady enough that it refused to disappear. He shifted his weight, the gravel beneath his boots crunching softly, and glanced over at his partner, who stood a few feet away near the rear of the vehicle, arms crossed, watching with a look that hovered somewhere between routine and curiosity. The flashing lights continued to wash over them, painting Danielle's face in alternating color, revealing nothing but calm in her expression, a stillness that did not match the tension of the situation. Public service, Ryan repeated, slower this time, as if testing the words for something hidden inside them. That is pretty broad. Danielle did not turn around. Her hands remained where they were, resting lightly against the car, her shoulders relaxed, her breathing even. It usually is, she said. There was no edge in her tone, no attempt to correct him, just a quiet truth placed gently into the space. For a moment, neither of them spoke. The night seemed to stretch around them, the distant hum of a passing car fading quickly as it moved farther down the road, leaving behind a silence that felt heavier than before. Ryan looked back down at the license again, his thumb brushing lightly over the surface as if the answer might reveal itself through touch alone. Danielle Carter. The address listed was temporary housing, a short-term lease, nothing that anchored her firmly into the neighborhood, nothing that made her familiar. You said you just transferred, he said, his voice narrowing slightly, focusing in. Transferred from where? Danielle blinked once, slowly, then let her gaze drift toward the reflection of the patrol lights dancing across the windshield in front of her. From out of state, she replied. Again, simple. Again, incomplete in a way that invited assumption. Ryan exhaled through his nose, a quiet sound. Almost a scoff, but not quite. The kind of reaction that filled the gaps when answers did not satisfy expectations. "You are not giving me much to work with," he said. Danielle's fingers shifted slightly against the metal, not tense, just adjusting, as if reminding herself of the present moment, of where she was standing. "I have answered your questions," she said. "If there is something specific you need, you can ask it." The words were measured, respectful, but there was a firmness beneath them now, a subtle boundary being drawn without raising her voice. Ryan looked at her, really looked this time, as if trying to find something that justified pushing further, something that would restore the sense of certainty he had started with. But all he saw was composure. No sudden movements. No conflicting answers. No signs of anything he could point to and say, "There it is." Behind him, his partner shifted again, glancing down at the empty back seat of the car, then back at Ryan, a silent question passing between them. "How much longer?" The radio crackled once more, louder this time. A dispatcher calling for status updates from nearby units. Routine check-ins that marked time in a way nothing else could. Ryan did not answer right away. Instead, he stepped slightly closer to Danielle, lowering his voice just enough that it felt more personal, more pointed. "You understand why we stopped you, right?" he asked. Danielle's eyes moved, not turning her head, just enough to acknowledge him in her peripheral vision. "No," she said. The honesty landed differently than anything else she had said so far. It did not challenge him. It did not accuse him. It simply existed, clear and unfiltered. Ryan paused, caught for a fraction of a second, then recovered, straightening slightly as if to reassert control over the moment. "You were driving a little slower than the flow of traffic," he said, though the explanation sounded thinner now, stretched over something that had already happened. Danielle absorbed the words, let them settle, then nodded once, a small, almost imperceptible movement. "I see," she said, but there was something in the way she said it, something quiet and knowing, as if she understood far more about the situation than he expected. And for the first time since the stop began, the certainty in Ryan Blake's posture shifted, just slightly, like a structure that had been solid a moment ago now carrying the faintest crack beneath the surface. The silence did not break all at once. It shifted, slowly, like the air before a storm changes pressure in a way you can feel, but cannot see. And Danielle Carter sensed it in the way Ryan Blake adjusted his stance again, in the way his partner no longer scanned the car, but instead watched him, waiting for a direction that had not yet come. The flashing lights continued, steady and indifferent, casting long shadows that stretched and pulled across the pavement, across Danielle's shoes, across the lower edge of the patrol car door, turning ordinary objects into something sharper, more defined. Ryan cleared his throat lightly, a small sound, but it carried the weight of someone recalibrating. "Go ahead and turn around for me," he said, though she already was, and the instruction felt less like a request for action and more like a need to reassert control over a moment that had begun to drift. Danielle did not move immediately, not in defiance, not in hesitation, but in awareness. She slowly lifted her hands from the roof of the car and turned, smooth and deliberate, until she was facing him fully for the first time since stepping out of the vehicle. The red and blue lights reflected in her eyes, steady, unflinching, and for a brief second, Ryan's own reflection caught in them, distorted by color, by motion, by something he could not quite name. "Is there a reason I am being detained?" she asked. The question landed clean, precise, not loud, not confrontational, but unmistakably direct. It was the first time she had asked something instead of answering, and it shifted the balance of the moment in a way that could not be undone. Ryan blinked once, then again, as if the simplicity of the question required more effort to process than anything else she had said. "We are just conducting a routine stop," he replied, but the words came out a fraction slower than before, less certain, as if they were being chosen carefully instead of automatically. Danielle held his gaze. "Routine requires a reason," she said. Her voice remained calm, but there was clarity in it now, a quiet authority that did not raise itself, did not push, but did not yield either. Behind Ryan, his partner shifted again, the subtle scrape of his boot against the asphalt breaking the stillness for a moment before it settled back in. The radio crackled, louder this time, a dispatcher calling for acknowledgement, and Ryan reached up instinctively, pressing the button on his shoulder. Unit 12, status check, the voice said. Ryan hesitated, his eyes still on Danielle, then responded, all clear. The words felt automatic, but something in the way he said them suggested they were no longer entirely true. Danielle's gaze did not waver. Am I free to go? She asked. Another clean question. Another shift. Ryan exhaled slowly, looking down for a brief second, then back up, as if searching for something he could hold on to, something that justified continuing. But the space between them had changed. It was no longer filled with assumption. It was filled with awareness. He glanced at the license in his hand again, then at her, then back at the empty interior of the car, as if retracing steps that no longer led anywhere solid. Just give me a minute, he said. Danielle nodded once, a small acknowledgement, and lowered her hands to her sides, no longer resting them on the car, no longer positioned as someone being held in place. The shift was subtle, but it was there. She stood upright, composed, her presence no longer framed by compliance, but by something else, something quieter and stronger. Ryan stepped back, turning slightly toward his patrol car, lifting the radio again, his voice lower now as he spoke into it, requesting a check that should have already been unnecessary. The static answered him first, then the dispatcher's voice, routine, neutral, asking for clarification. Danielle watched, not with impatience, not with concern, but with a stillness that suggested she was no longer waiting for permission, only for the moment to catch up to what she already understood. And somewhere in that quiet stretch of seconds, under the flashing lights and the low hum of the idling engines, the direction of the night began to turn. The radio in Ryan Blake's hand hissed before it answered, a sharp burst of static that seemed louder than it should have been, cutting through the quiet like a signal that something was not aligning the way it was supposed to. He turned slightly away from Danielle, his back no longer fully squared to her, one foot shifting as if he needed distance, not just physically, but mentally, from the situation that had begun to slip out of his control. Dispatch, confirm identity on Danielle Carter, he said, his voice lower now, less certain, the words no longer carrying the same automatic authority they had at the start of the stop. There was a pause. Not long, but long enough to be noticed. Long enough for the silence to stretch across the space between them again, filling it with something heavier than before. Danielle stood still, her posture relaxed, her arms resting naturally at her sides, her gaze steady, not fixed on Ryan, but not avoiding him either. She did not need to move. She did not need to speak. The moment was already moving in her direction. The dispatcher's voice came back through the radio, calm, procedural, but with a slight shift in tone, the kind that only someone paying close attention would catch. Unit 12, stand by, the voice said. Ryan's jaw tightened just slightly. Standing by, he replied, but the words felt thinner now, stretched over uncertainty. Behind him, his partner glanced toward the patrol car, then back at Ryan, a subtle question forming in his eyes, one that had not been there before. The flashing lights continued their rhythm, red then blue, reflecting off Danielle's jacket, off the windows of nearby houses, off the polished surface of the patrol car, turning everything into fragments of color and shadow. The night felt still, but not calm. It felt suspended, waiting. Ryan shifted again, this time pacing a small step to the side, then back, the movement restless, controlled, but no longer grounded in certainty. He glanced at Danielle once more, as if trying to read something in her expression, something that would restore the balance he had started with. But there was nothing to read. No fear. No urgency. Just presence. The radio crackled again. Unit 12, the dispatcher said, and this time the tone had changed, just enough to matter. Be advised, name returns as active law enforcement personnel. Ryan blinked, the words landing in pieces rather than all at once. Repeat, he said, more sharply than before, as if clarity could correct what he had just heard. There was another brief pause, then the dispatcher spoke again, slower this time. Danielle Carter is listed as active law enforcement. Rank, Captain. The words settled into the air like weight. Heavy, unavoidable. For a moment, nothing moved. Not Ryan, not his partner, not even the quiet street around them. The flashing lights continued, but they felt different now, no longer framing authority, but exposing it. Ryan lowered the radio slightly, his grip tightening around it, his mind catching up to a reality he had not prepared for. His partner's posture shifted instantly, shoulders straightening, arms uncrossing, the casual stance replaced by something more rigid, more aware. Danielle did not react. Not immediately. She did not step forward. She did not speak. She simply stood there, letting the moment settle fully, letting the truth take its place without forcing it. Ryan swallowed, his voice quieter now, almost careful. "Dispatch, confirm assignment," he said, as if there might still be something to correct, something to reinterpret. The response came quickly this time. "Confirmed. Captain Danielle Carter, recently transferred. Assigned to this district effective immediately." The words closed the gap completely. There was no space left for assumption. No room for interpretation. Ryan's shoulders dropped just slightly, the tension shifting into something else, something heavier, something closer to realization. The street, the lights, the silence, all of it remained the same. But the balance had changed. Completely. And for the first time since the stop began, Ryan Blake did not know what to do next. The word captain did not echo out loud, but it settled into everything, into the pavement beneath their feet, into the flashing lights that no longer felt like a display of control, but something closer to exposure, into the quiet space between breaths where no one quite knew how to move next. Danielle Carter let the silence exist without interruption, her posture unchanged, her expression calm, as if this moment was not a surprise, but an inevitability that had simply taken its time arriving. Ryan Blake stood a few feet away, the radio still in his hand, but now lowered, forgotten for the moment as his mind worked through the shift that had just taken place. His partner straightened fully, his stance no longer casual, his eyes flicking briefly from Danielle to Ryan and back again, recalibrating, reassessing, understanding without needing to say a word. The night air felt cooler now, sharper against the skin, carrying the faint hum of distant traffic and the soft rustle of leaves from a nearby tree, sounds that had been there the entire time, but now seemed louder in the absence of certainty. Ryan cleared his throat, a small, restrained sound, as if testing whether his voice would still hold the same authority it had minutes ago. "Captain," he said, the title coming out carefully, almost unfamiliar, like something he had not expected to use in this context. Danielle met his gaze fully now, not with challenge, not with triumph, but with a quiet steadiness that made the moment heavier instead of lighter. "Officer," she replied. One word. Even. Balanced. The kind of acknowledgement that did not erase what had happened, but did not escalate it either. Ryan shifted his weight again, his shoulders no longer squared in the same way, the rigid confidence replaced by something more measured, more aware. "I was not aware of your assignment," he said. The explanation felt incomplete even as he spoke it, as if both of them understood that awareness had never been the real issue. Danielle let a brief pause settle before responding, just long enough for the truth of the moment to breathe. "That is clear," she said. No accusation, no raised tone, just clarity. The flashing lights continued behind them, steady and indifferent, casting alternating colors across their uniforms, across the hood of the car, across the quiet houses that still watched from behind darkened windows. Ryan glanced down for a moment, then back up, his eyes no longer searching for confirmation, but processing consequence. His partner took a small step back, creating space, not out of fear, but out of recognition that the dynamic had shifted in a way that required distance. Danielle inhaled slowly, the cool air filling her lungs, grounding her, and then exhaled just as evenly, her breath visible for a brief second before fading into the night. She did not move toward them. She did not step away. She simply stood where she was, present, composed, allowing the weight of the situation to rest where it belonged. Ryan's voice lowered slightly when he spoke again. "We were responding to behavior that seemed unusual," he said, the words carefully chosen, as if precision might restore balance. Danielle tilted her head just a fraction, considering, not dismissing, but not accepting without thought. "Driving under the speed limit is not a violation," she said. Her tone remained calm, but there was a firmness now, a quiet authority that did not need to raise itself to be felt. Ryan nodded once, a small, restrained movement, acknowledging the point without arguing it. The radio crackled again at his side, but he did not reach for it this time. He did not need another voice. The moment was already speaking clearly enough. Danielle's eyes moved briefly to the patrol car, to the lights still flashing, then back to Ryan. "Procedure matters," she said. The words were simple, but they carried weight, not as a lecture, not as a reprimand, but as a reminder that extended beyond this single moment. Ryan's jaw tightened slightly, then relaxed, the tension shifting into something quieter, something closer to reflection. His partner remained still, attentive, no longer scanning for threats, but observing, learning. The night stretched around them, unchanged in its appearance, but completely altered in meaning. And in that stillness, under the steady pulse of red and blue, the authority that had once been assumed was now being understood for what it truly required. Ryan Blake did not speak right away, and that silence carried more weight than anything he could have said, settling into the space between them like something that could not be undone, only understood. The flashing lights continued their steady rhythm, but now they felt slower, almost distant, as if the urgency that once drove them had faded, leaving behind only the truth they illuminated. Danielle Carter remained still, her posture relaxed but grounded, her presence no longer framed by the situation, but by something deeper, something that did not depend on titles or confirmation from a radio. She had already been who she was before the stop began. Now they simply knew it. Ryan finally lifted his gaze fully to meet hers, and there was something different in it now, something stripped of assumption, of quick judgment, replaced instead by a kind of awareness that came too late to prevent the moment, but not too late to learn from it. "Captain," he said again, quieter this time, the word no longer unfamiliar, but heavier, more deliberate. Danielle held his gaze for a second, then nodded once, acknowledging the shift without emphasizing it. Ryan inhaled slowly, the cool night air filling his chest, then exhaled as if releasing something he had been holding on to since the moment he first stepped out of his car. "There was no violation," he said. The admission was simple, but it changed everything. It removed the last thread that had been holding the stop together. It left only what had truly been there all along. Danielle listened without interrupting, her expression unchanged, but her eyes attentive, present. Ryan continued, choosing each word more carefully now, no longer speaking out of habit, but intention. "I made an assumption," he said. The sentence hung in the air, exposed, unprotected. His partner shifted slightly beside him, not stepping in, not speaking, but clearly listening, the lesson landing for him as well. Danielle let a brief pause follow, not to create discomfort, but to give the truth space to settle. "Assumptions shape outcomes," she said. Her voice remained calm, but there was a quiet weight to it now, something earned, something lived. Ryan nodded once, his jaw tightening just slightly before relaxing again. He looked down at the license still in his hand, then extended it toward her, the movement slower than before, more deliberate. Danielle reached out and took it, her fingers brushing the edge of the card, steady, controlled, the simple action marking a return of something that should never have been taken for granted. The second officer straightened fully now, his posture aligned, his gaze no longer searching, but attentive, as if recalibrating his understanding of the role he stood in. The radio at Ryan's shoulder crackled again, but he ignored it, the moment in front of him requiring more attention than any call coming through the static. Danielle slipped the license back into her pocket, her movements smooth, unhurried, then looked at Ryan once more. "What matters is not that this happened," she said. "It is what happens next." The words were not harsh. They were not forgiving either. They were simply true. Ryan absorbed them, his expression tightening for a brief second before settling into something more grounded, more real. He glanced briefly at his partner, then back at Danielle, as if silently acknowledging that the lesson extended beyond himself. The street remained quiet, the houses still, the distant hum of traffic barely audible now, as if the world had stepped back to let this moment exist on its own terms. Ryan took a small step back, creating space, not as a retreat, but as recognition. "You are free to go," he said, his voice steady, but different now, no longer carrying the same unchecked authority, but something more measured, more aware. Danielle did not move immediately. She held the moment for just a second longer, her gaze steady, her presence unchanged, then gave a small nod, not of submission, but of closure. The flashing lights reflected in her eyes one last time as she turned slightly toward her car, the night air brushing past her, cool and steady, carrying with it the quiet understanding that had replaced everything that came before. And behind her, under the fading pulse of red and blue, two officers stood in the stillness, no longer certain in the way they had been, but perhaps closer to understanding than they had ever been before. Danielle Carter opened the driver's side door with a quiet, controlled motion, the soft click of the handle sounding louder than it should have in the stillness that followed everything that had just unfolded. She paused for a brief second before getting in, her hand resting lightly on the edge of the door, her gaze lifting just slightly toward the patrol lights still flashing behind her, their red and blue reflections stretching across the windshield like fading signals of a moment that had already changed shape. She did not rush. She did not hesitate. She simply moved with the same steady composure that had carried her through every second of the encounter. As she slid into the seat, the interior of the car wrapped around her in quiet familiarity, the faint scent of leather and the low hum of the engine grounding her again in something normal, something controlled. Outside, Ryan Blake stood where she had left him, his posture no longer rigid, no longer anchored in the certainty he had started with, but not broken either, just shifted, as if something inside him had been recalibrated and had not yet fully settled. His partner remained a step behind, silent, observant, his stance now reflecting a different kind of awareness, one that did not rely on assumption, but on attention. Danielle placed both hands on the steering wheel for a moment, her fingers resting lightly against the textured surface, feeling the familiar grip beneath her palms, then glanced into the rearview mirror. The flashing lights reflected back at her, softer now, less intrusive, their intensity fading not because they had changed, but because their meaning had. Ryan took a step forward, not too close, not intruding, just enough to be heard without raising his voice. "Captain," he said again, and this time the word carried no hesitation, only acknowledgement. Danielle turned her head slightly toward him, her expression calm, open, but not inviting conversation beyond what was necessary. Ryan exhaled slowly, the breath visible in the cool night air, then spoke with a clarity that had not been present before. "I will document this stop," he said. The statement was simple, procedural, but it held weight, an understanding of accountability that had not been part of the moment at the beginning. Danielle studied him for a second, not searching for sincerity, but recognizing it. "Make sure it reflects what actually happened," she replied. Her tone remained even, but there was a firmness in it now, not directed at him personally, but at the standard itself. Ryan nodded once, a small but deliberate motion. "It will," he said. Behind him, the second officer shifted his weight slightly, then straightened, his gaze moving from Ryan to Danielle with a respect that had not been there before, not out of obligation, but out of understanding. The street remained quiet, the houses still, the distant hum of a passing vehicle barely audible as it moved through the far end of the block. Danielle turned her attention back to the road ahead, her hands settling more firmly on the steering wheel now, ready to move, ready to leave the moment behind without carrying its weight forward unnecessarily. Ryan stepped back another half step, creating clear space in front of the car, his presence no longer an obstacle, but a boundary that had been acknowledged and corrected. The flashing lights began to feel out of place now, their urgency no longer needed, their message already delivered. Danielle pressed her foot lightly on the brake, then shifted the car into drive, the movement smooth, controlled, the engine responding with a low, steady sound. For a brief second, she remained still, her eyes forward, her breathing even, then she lifted her foot and allowed the car to move. Slowly at first, then with quiet confidence, she guided the vehicle forward, past the patrol car, past the officers, past the space where assumption had once stood unchecked. As she passed Ryan, their eyes met for just a fraction of a second, no words exchanged, no gesture made, just a shared understanding that did not need to be spoken. The patrol lights reflected across the side of her car one last time, then slipped away as she moved beyond them, the colors fading into the darkness behind her. Ryan watched her go, his posture still, his expression thoughtful, as if replaying the moment not to justify it, but to understand it. His partner stood beside him, silent, the lessons settling in without discussion. And as the sound of Danielle's car faded into the distance, the street returned to its quiet state, unchanged in appearance, but no longer the same place it had been before she arrived. The red and blue lights dimmed slowly as Ryan Blake reached into his patrol car and switched them off, the sudden absence of their rhythm leaving behind a silence that felt deeper than before, like the night had taken a breath it had been holding the entire time. The street returned to its natural state, dark and still, the houses once again just houses, the pavement just pavement, no longer a stage for authority, no longer a place where assumptions moved unchecked. Ryan stood there for a moment, the quiet settling into his chest, heavier now without the noise to distract from it. His partner shifted beside him, glancing down the road where Danielle Carter's car had disappeared, then back at Ryan, but neither of them spoke. There was nothing to say that would not feel smaller than what had just happened. Ryan walked slowly back to the patrol car, each step measured, his boots pressing lightly against the asphalt, the sound crisp in the still air. He opened the driver's side door, but did not get in right away. Instead, he rested one hand on the roof, the same place Danielle's hands had been earlier, and for a brief moment, he paused, as if feeling the echo of that moment through the cold metal. The radio crackled again, a routine call coming through, another unit requesting backup several miles away, another situation waiting to unfold, but Ryan did not respond immediately. His eyes moved across the dashboard, then to the blank screen of the onboard computer, then back out to the empty street. Everything looked the same, but it was not. He finally sat down, the seat creaking softly under his weight, and reached for the system to begin the report he had promised to write. His fingers hovered over the keyboard for a second longer than usual, not because he did not know what to type, but because he understood now that every word mattered. Not just for procedure, but for truth. Outside, his partner remained standing for a moment longer, then circled around and got into the passenger seat, closing the door quietly, as if not to disturb something that still lingered in the air. Inside the car, the glow of the dashboard lights replaced the flashing colors, steady and neutral, illuminating their faces in a softer way, one that did not hide anything. Ryan began typing, each keystroke deliberate, the sound filling the small space, marking time in a different way now, not as urgency, but as accountability. The words formed slowly, carefully, not shaped by habit, but by reflection. Across town, Danielle drove through the quiet streets, the hum of her engine steady, the road stretching out ahead of her under dim streetlights that cast long, soft shadows across the asphalt. Her hands rested lightly on the steering wheel, her posture relaxed, her breathing even, as if the night had returned to something ordinary, something expected. But her eyes remained focused, aware, carrying with them the weight of what had happened, not as something to hold on to, but as something to remember. She did not look back. She did not need to. The moment was already behind her, settled where it belonged. As she approached the next intersection, the traffic light shifted from red to green, the change smooth, quiet, almost unnoticed, but it marked a continuation, a forward movement that required no announcement. She pressed lightly on the accelerator, guiding the car through the intersection, the tires rolling softly over the pavement, the city opening up ahead of her in calm, steady lines. And somewhere behind her, on a street that now looked like any other, two officers sat in silence, the echo of a moment lingering not in sound, but in understanding, in the kind that does not fade quickly, in the kind that stays, shaping what comes next without needing to be spoken at all.